We'll be back in a second. I think he's gone to put a little towel over a bird that flew, a kingfisher that flew into a window in the
Oh
building.
no. How are you guys?
Pretty
How
good.
are you, Lauren?
I'm
How was
good. I'm good, Michael. Yeah. I had a nice swim today in the cold ocean
Oh,
Oh
nice.
wow.
with a wetsuit. But
I had a swim 2 days ago in Georgian Bay, and then yesterday the temperature plummeted. So that was clearly the last swim of the season.
yeah,
Yeah.
our water temperature here was 14 degrees today. So it's getting quite cool.
Good for
Yeah.
them.
Oh,
I,
great.
I love the conversation about birds because I think that so many poets think of birds as metaphors for poets themselves, right? So I love that. Yes.
Yeah. Well, and kingfishers are like special.
Diving birds.
Yeah. Well, then there's the kingfishers too. Olson's marvelous declaration of war on Eliot.
I see it as a rebuttal.
I,
I see it as a rebuttal to Eliot, not
I
as
was really, I mean, it's pretty apropos to what we were reading for today. Like there's that whole section there where Duncan just kind of turns loose on Eliot.
yeah, I've got to pull up the PDF. Thanks for reminding me. Ah, you think I'd have it handy. I think we've got one person running late today, Chris Brandenberger, and I think otherwise we might all be here. So I'm I'm a little high strung because we've got folks coming into town tomorrow for our ninth Cascadia Poetry Festival. There's more information on our website, cascadiapoeticslab.org. God, it's going to be fun. Matt Treese is on the board of directors. Lauren Medley is one of our featured poets. She'll be on a panel that is the practice of Cascadia, the practice of the self, which I think is going to be fascinating. Jason Worth, Chair of Philosophy at Seattle U, will moderate both panels and his first public appearance since having major ankle surgery, where fused, they've done fusion on his ankles. So I understand he's finally able to put some weight on his left foot. And this is just a prelude to the more intense surgery on his right ankle. So despite all that, he's there moderating two panels. And that
Wow.
starts on Friday morning. So busy getting things together with that, making plans to pick people up at the airport and that kind of thing. So I'm going to pull up and just have it ready to go. And it takes a minute to figure it out, but I'll have that the HD book up, and in the meantime, let's turn it over to our master of ceremonies, our fearless leader in Northern Ontario, done swimming for the season. Please welcome Michael.
You're terrified leader. Right? So, well, God, I mean, this was a marvelous experience to like plunge into Duncan's thinking about these poets, especially the great triumvirate of H.D. Pound and Williams, and locate it all so clearly, you know? I mean, what a marvelous experience. What did you think? I mean, was this all old news to you? Yeah, go ahead, Jay.
I am curious about people's thoughts on Williams' inclusion in the triumvirate, because I feel like he is uh, very different from Pound and HD in ways that I'm having trouble uh, describing to myself. But I've only read parts of Patterson, and it was a long time ago, so I don't know it very well. And I am curious about other people's thoughts on how Williams compares in Duncan's view to Pound and HD, and whether he's at the truly one of three, or whether he's like a quarter and they're the other fraction, larger fraction. I don't know.
Anybody want to weigh in on that?
Oh, I
I
mean, I
would
think
say
the
something, and I love. Sorry, I hope you guys can hear me right now. I know there was I got a new computer. Can you guys hear me?
Mhm.
Who's talking?
Okay. Sorry, it's me, Boyd.
Oh, it's
Um,
Boyd. Hi, Boyd. Okay.
so I love what Jay asked, and I was thinking through his question um last session about whether or not Duncan was working through something. And I think that's kind of relevant. I think we might sort of consider that. The idea that there is a significant difference in book one and book two in terms of how he approaches poetry. Um, I also think, and this sort of touches upon his question about Williams. What's going on in terms of that erotic relationship between Pound and HD and Williams? And even though it seems as though uh, Williams might be sort of left out, like I'm like, why are you in love with Pound? I
Why,
love
why,
Pound too.
why
yeah,
is
oh
love
yeah,
Pound.
I totally agree. But
why is I didn't get the question. Why is Williams in love with Pound? Is that what you said?
Sorry, why is Pound a source of erotic fascination? Might be the question.
Oh, wow. Well, you know what happened, right? I mean,
Yes, I do.
no,
Right.
Duncan didn't have all the information. Williams, in fact, dissembled wildly in the latter part of his life about his relationship with HT and Pound because he actually proposed marriage to HT. And like they were all three together at the University of Pennsylvania, right? Like they were tight. It was like a menage. Um, but she turned him down and went to, this was like around 1910, right? And then she ran to Pound in London in 1911, I think it was. And Williams never forgave her for that. Like he never fucking forgave her. It was like and then she like made that stupid comment that Duncan points out that it was a ridiculous accusation, the ring-a-ding-ding accusation, because Williams was not interested in participating in relationship to the classic European cultures in the same way that Pound and HD was. I mean, he was totally in the American grain. Like that was his trip. That was what he was what he was doing. And her put down hurt, but especially on top of the fact that she turned him down when he proposed to her. Um, so he never kind of missed an opportunity he never was like hostile, but he was always like sort of passive aggressive in relation to judging her work. Um, and the report, I don't know if you ever read his autobiography, but the report of, well, and then the other thing that happened, of course, was that he and McCalman met Breyer and HD. They came to New York, and this would have been in the 30s, I guess. And Breyer Williams was like really close to McCalman. Like they were tight. They were buds. And they understood themselves as working together with the magazine Contact to actually give body to a vital American mode of writing. And Breyer kidnapped McCalman basically. She offered him, like she was rich to the moon and back, right? And she offered him, she was looking for a cover for her lesbianism for her parents. Her parents were not copacetic with the idea that she was living with a woman. And so she needed somebody to marry her. And she bought McCalman. She offered him a whole shitload of money and the freedom to publish work that he found um, worthwhile. Contact Press was a result of that. And that really drove a knife to William's heart, like because it was like they showed up and when they left, they stole his right hand man. They stole the whole thing, you know. Anyway, whatever you think about that. I think Williams, if you want to read Williams, you have to start with Spring and All. Spring and All is an absolutely revolutionary, incredibly brilliant, radical overturning of everything Eliot stood for. No, it was like,
So do you think that's uh why Duncan liked him so much?
well, I think he's a brilliant poet. And I mean, he's his take, I don't like thinking about the relationship. I mean, the part of the fact is that they were all connected to each other throughout their artistic lives and in intense ways. No, Williams, like when Pound came back to the States to try to convince Roosevelt not to enter World War II, no, like he came over with his cantos and he was gonna like get Roosevelt to like understand that he shouldn't be fighting against the Europeans, especially the Italians. He stayed with Williams. And Williams, like he slept on the couch. I had the good fortune of cataloging the archives of James Sibley Watson, who was the editor of Dial magazine, the incarnation from the 20s that first published Eliot and all those people. I don't know if you know the Dial. Um, but James Sibley Watson he had a bunch of money, lived in Rochester. He and another guy, Sales, can't remember his first name. He was the radical one. Anyway, they had a bunch of dough and they liberally spread it among artists. And as a result, Watson had an incredible archive of correspondence to just about everybody. And including Williams, and Williams wrote him a letter describing Pound on his couch as a derailed freight train. Um, that he's and Pound had just like run into the wall, like, but they were tight. And there's a marvelous photograph. You must have seen this photograph of them from that period where he's got Pound and they have their arms around each other. They're bare chested. It must be hot, like a hot day outside, and they have their shirts off and someone snapped their photo and they're like they've known each other their whole lives, their whole artistic lives. And HD was part of that. Negatively with Williams, but with Pound continued. Like I think they just reissued the Random House. Random House put out a contemporary poetry pamphlet series, and they consulted Pound about who to include in it, and Pound told them they had to include HD. And this is probably in the late 20s. And they weren't, I don't know that they were close. And then she, of course, wrote that beautiful, beautiful book about Ezra, The End to Torment. Um, I mean, nobody was pulling punches about who was screwed up, this, that, or the other thing, but these were people who had bonded really early in their lives with each other, and you don't ever give up on that, right? Like those bonds last forever, forever. So that's one reason Williams is part of it, because he was part of it. I mean, they talked to each other all the time, and Pound told Williams that he didn't like his line, and Williams told him to fuck off, and they corresponded. They continued to correspond about it. Um, and when HD came to New York, she saw Williams. I mean, it may not have been a happy meeting, but that's who she saw. So in that sense, there was that absolute bond. And I don't know what else to say. I mean, in the thing is that it's not really a question of some sort of objective measurement. It's a question of, I think, as Duncan puts it, of the constellation of stars, the constellation of stars that guided him in through poetry. And those were the three main stars in that constellation for him. Uh, I don't know, whatever you think about him. If all you've read is Patterson, then you have uh, a limited view of what he did. The first two books, Cora and Hell and Spring and All, are I think Spring and All is the most important book of the 1920s for poetry. I think it's more important than The Wasteland, more important than the Cantos. For me it is, because it announces a way out of the literary loudly. I mean, it takes poetry out of the literary.
Yeah, and
So
Duncan notes that uh, in was it chapter 2 in here, and
yeah, yes,
that there is that um, attention to the um, re resurrection aspect, and so the core myth kind of becomes core to all of them in some way.
yes, yeah, absolutely.
So I didn't mean to say that I hadn't read the earlier Williams. I meant to say that I had not read all of Patterson. And I was
Oh, okay.
curious
Sorry,
why,
sorry, Jay. Yeah.
I was curious why Duncan to me, it seemed like Duncan was more interested in Patterson than in the earlier work.
Well, I mean, Patterson is Williams' what masterpiece, I guess you would say. It's his. I mean, Pound's got the cantos, and Williams has Patterson, and HD has, well, she has the War Trilogy, and she's got Helen in Egypt and some other stuff. But those are the poems of their maturity. Um, and they are masterpieces in the sense that they are the work of people who have mastered their craft. And that's what I mean. That's what Duncan goes on and on about, right? Basically, is how the detail with which he approaches the way they come to their work and what their work does is astonishing to me. I mean, I don't know anybody else who has so thoroughly and it's not the repetition is part of it, you know, it's the method, it's the way that he comes back to it and opens up a facet of it, and then he'll come back later to that facet and open that up into another facet, and then continually pushing deeper into his understanding of the dynamic factors that figured in the creation of that writing. Because what's he doing? He's looking for a poetics. And he's pretty clear about that, you know. He says this is at the very beginning, he says he talks about the book as an apprenticeship, his apprenticeship, which I guess means, I mean, an apprenticeship is where you put yourself under the discipline of a master, of someone who actually knows a trade and is going to teach you the basics of it. Um, so I guess when he says it's an apprenticeship, he's talking specifically about his relationship to HD. But everyone figures in that in some sense. It's so exciting. It was, I don't know, maybe you know, but I just find it such an exciting
He has
period.
this really cool line on page 439. In 1948, I first realized I was not original but derived in my spirit in poetry.
Yeah,
Taking my cues from adopted parents, I found my speech and play ready as from the sounding of the bells a tribute to the angels.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And the question is, I mean, this is a workshop, right? So you guys are presumably all processing this material as part of your own practice. Like, you know, you're going to come out of this like writing differently than you came into it. Did you want to say something, Julia? I can't hear you. I think you're muted.
I'm on my phone because
There
I'm
you go.
traveling. Only about Patterson. Um, in class, Duncan explained how exciting it was because Patterson came in series. And so he would wait for book two, book three, with this, this anticipation
Yeah,
of what Williams would deliver next.
yeah,
And so when he talked about it, one felt the personal, I don't know how you say that, the personal excitement of waiting for the next issue
yeah,
of what was going to form a movement in culture. So, I mean, if you were, from my point of view, if you were part of that, and these others were also attendant to it, whatever their personal feeling about Williams' approach. I mean, that is a cementing karmic relationship.
yeah. Yes.
That's your tribe.
Yeah, and the especially in a context like the background to this writing is that there was at that time an official literary history that did not include HD, that had to a large extent banished Pound, and who and that had a very troubled relationship with Williams. Um, he was seen as someone who, well, hey, listen, I wrote a damn good paper. This has been back in the 90s. It was an analysis of Williams' prosody. Um, and one of the poems that I looked at was the poem about this is just to say I have eaten
Yeah, yeah.
that one. And I sent it to a journal, it wasn't, I didn't think that they were, anyway, I sent it to this journal and I get this letter back telling me that I haven't proven in my paper that what Williams wrote was actually a poem. Okay, so that's like 1995. There's people who are saying that Williams doesn't write poetry, you know? So the
Can I just
culture,
jump in here, Mike, really quickly? Because I think one of the things I have so many questions to ask, and I think that I hope everyone can hear me. I know my goodness sakes, I know my internet connection is probably not working the best. One of the things I want to ask, and I think this is kind of important, but we haven't really talked about this, is the question of the medium of transmission. So that is to say that Duncan was working within a space in which he sort of collected these things in different arenas, and you brought them together. And
I'm sorry, he collected what?
the HD book.
Oh, okay.
So and that became an actual book as such, right? So when we think of and and honestly, I want to pose this question in the most I don't know, generous, poetic way of what is a book, right? So these were things that were sort of posed um, in different publications, and then later on they became a book as such. And so when you think about what publication means and who is sort of shut out of of different voices and whatnot, what is a book? You know, and how do we think through? And I again, I mean this in literally the most uh, like generous sense of like I'm there with
I don't
HD and
understand. I don't understand, Boyd. Like, I mean, a book is something that has a front cover and a back cover and a bunch of pages in between. Is that
Well,
fair?
I mean, the HD book was only published in like obscure places and until you did your thing, Michael. I remember in the late 80s running around to all the different libraries, campus
Yeah.
libraries, trying to find the fragments.
Yeah. It
Yep.
was wonderful, wasn't it? But that was, see,
Yeah.
Duncan conceived it as a book. I mean, he actually had made arrangements to have it published as a book with Black Sparrow. And when he got into some, I don't know, some argument with the publisher, John, what's his name? And
Martin.
yeah, they pulled the book from their list. Um, but he had himself manually typeset it. And it was raring to go. So it was in his imagination anyway, and in his plan, a book from the beginning. And it was a book that had two parts. Although I mean, I'm not sure how much he planned this out or how much I mean, because he's so committed to open form. And all the chapters that we read for tonight basically are about the development of a poetics of open form by these particular poets.
I'm sorry.
Sorry? Anyway,
Sorry,
that's okay.
Michael. I didn't realize. I didn't realize my mic was on. I kicked my dog.
Oh no.
Yes, and apologized.
Oh
So I
God.
got to get it off. But
Yeah.
I'm on my phone and I don't quite know how to work. Anyway, go ahead. That was a total there. I found it.
He says at one point, a ground appears as a new condition of what we are doing. Remember, this whole thing is about ground and stance and poetics, finding a poetics. Like how are you gonna how do you write? Where do you write from? Like how are you? What are you know? Where do you write from? And a ground, but a ground now has become a something that appears, something that appears as a condition of what we are doing. And so it's this whole notion that runs through these chapters that you don't begin with, you don't begin by knowing what you're doing. You begin by opening yourself to the imagination.
Mike, I think in this chat, Scott asked a really pertinent question about the serial poem as sort of
I didn't
offshoot.
see it. Sorry, I didn't see it.
Offshoot is the open concept, and might be a means of bringing in Spicer and Robin Blazer into the discussion as a means of answering this question about like what the hell is a book. Maybe it doesn't have a closed. Maybe it just goes on and on.
I mean, what do you want to know, Boyd? Like in terms of a book, what do you want to know?
Well,
What's your question really? I mean, it's not just what is a book, right?
well, that's a really good question. What is my question really? I'm not sure. It's an open question. I think it's something that we might want to think about. Look, it's it's not a question where I think there's an answer. But I think that's something that Duncan is thinking through and posing. And the idea of like what a book is or even what a poem is something he's trying to think through. And so I don't know what the answer to what a book is. And I might want to just turn that over to everyone else and sort of think through what it means to do research on poets and figure this out.
Erin has her hand up, Michael. Erin does not
Oh,
want
come
to
on,
talk.
Aaron.
No, she doesn't want to talk now. Okay.
Okay. I mean, I write, I personally, because of my relationship with Robin and my adoration of Jack Spicer, I always write in books. I don't write individual poems. I think of a book. I mean, there's no, well, that's true. I mean, although you know what, it's like that. Spicer talks about how do you break a line, and he talks about like whipping a piece of seaweed on the pier, and where it breaks, that's where the line breaks, right? Do you know that that's in one of I think it's in love poems. I can't remember exactly, but uh,
Well,
that's
it's
like,
also like
look,
that Duchamp exercise too of cutting the string and the string falling and how it lands determines what the length of the line is.
yeah. I mean, it's Spicer's not. That's pure chance. That's Duchamp playing with chance. I don't think with Spicer it was chance in the same way. It was knowledge. So you're a poet, so you know where your line breaks. Like if you're good, if your ear's good, if you're treating your work with respect, the respect it demands of you, then you'll know where the line breaks. It's just like that piece of seaweed knows where the line breaks. Um, and that it keeps coming back to that, doesn't it? It keeps coming back to knowledge. What kind of knowledge and where does that knowledge come from? How do you know when the book ends? How do you know it's a book? Well, you're a poet. That's how you know. No, I mean, the same way an engineer knows, what the stresses are on a bridge. Um, he has math to do that, and a poet has their ear. And that's a real thing. It's not like airy fairy. It's not, it's a real thing.
I'm wondering if Boyd, maybe the partially what you're working with is this with the notion of a book as Michael has just described as an entity in and of itself, rather than a collection of lyrics, of disparate elements that don't necessarily have a relationship, an explicit relationship with each other. There's really two different ways of thinking about book, and I don't know if that's partly what's coming for you.
And to follow that up, Michael, it would seem to me that the school that Duncan is representing and articulating is more in line with what you envision a book is, and not, 32 occasions, 32 events have happened, and now I've over the last 7 years, and now I have a book because I've written an occasional
No,
poem.
no,
So
that's a different kind of book. You're right. Absolutely. That's a different kind of book. I mean, I won't say it's not a book, but because it's got covers and it's got pages and a table of contents, but it's not a book in the sense that of the Duncan Spicer Blazer um, formations. For them, a book is a a run of poetry addressed to some central concern. And each each of the poems, I mean, it's different for the different poets. Like Spicer, I don't know if you, I mean, Spicer would like get smashed out of his head and go into the other room. Robin describes that in the essay, go into the other room and come out with a poem. And he'd do that every night. And each of the poems was a piece of this unfolding book. Um, whereas I think Duncan had a more, I don't know, I know that, I don't, I know Robin composed books. I'm not sure that, well, Duncan certainly did later. Like the last two books, the groundwork books are clearly books that were composed as books. Um, I don't know enough about Duncan's composition mode to know if that was how he did Bending the Bow and the other great book then. I don't know that. I don't know. So I can't say.
I think one thing that might be important to think about with respect to Boyd's question is HD. I mean, the the War Trilogy was not the War Trilogy until I think Duncan came up with that name.
He did.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and the three parts were published separately, and I don't think they came out together until like 1966 or something. Is that right?
Something like that. Yeah.
So where it was but he and Duncan really treats them simultaneously as one work, but also as separate works. And he's very careful about referring to which
Yeah.
book inside the War Trilogy that he's talking about.
I don't think the trilogy, I mean, clearly in HD's mind, there was a relationship between the books because she wrote them one after the other as the bombs were falling around her.
Yeah.
Um, so there was a relationship, but I don't know that she ever thought about the three of them as a book. I don't know that it matters really. The poems of each one of those books, they were each one of them was a book. Each one of them. The walls do not fall, tribute to the angels, and the flowering of the rod. Each one of those was conceived as a book and composed as a book. But it was open form. It was not, it was, she entered into a relationship with poetry and the books unfolded from that and what was going on around her, right? Uh, my trick was to like come up with all the titles of the poems, write all the titles out. I did that with Cosmographia, which is like it's a long book. And so there were like, you know, 40 titles, and I could just jump around and work on this poem or that poem or this poem or that poem. And they could refer back to each other. Some would refer to poems that haven't been written yet. Others would refer back to other things. And yeah, it was like, that was fun. I think HD had had a an idea in mind. The walls do not fall. I mean, the titles say it all, right? And that's what she was thinking about. The walls do not fall. And she entered that world and it unfolded for her.
Michael, do you know if she was involved with the whole cone of power, uh, kind of Wiccan protection spell on London during the?
I don't think so. And not
Oh,
that
okay.
I've heard of. I mean, she may have been, but not that I've heard of. She was very much involved with spiritualist, a spiritualist circle that included Lord Dowding,
Mhm.
who was
Yeah.
the air marshal in charge of the defense of, in charge of the Battle of Britain, the defense of the Battle of Britain. And he would, at these seances, he would communicate with dead pilots that he had sent out who had been killed. Now, she wrote a novel. I don't know if you know her novels. There were three novels that she wrote. This one was called The Sword Went Out to Sea. There was The White Rose and the Red, and there's one other that's escaping me right now that she referred to as her commedia in the sense of Dante's three poems being a commedia. And they were never published because nobody would touch them. No publisher would touch them. They are, she does not get credit for the work she did in prose. She really doesn't. And it's not an easy read. She learned from Joyce and she learned from Woolf, um, and she learned from Dorothy Richardson. And she came up with a prose that's uniquely hers and uniquely dense, um, because it's not dealing primarily ever with descriptions of the world. It's a constant mental flow, a constant mental process that doesn't give you a lot of material things to hold on to, You have to really pay attention to what's going on. But in this book, though, in the Sword Went Out to Sea, she fictionalizes these seances that she did with Doubting and others. And at one point she says quite clearly, she says, did this, was this, I can't remember the word she uses, but it's like, was this actually true? Did this actually happen? Did we actually communicate with spirits? Then she says, I don't know. Nobody can know, right? This is like, maybe not, but in any case, this is what happened. So it's just not like she's some kind of rabid spiritualist sucker out there like peddling the goods, right? She's asks the questions and she finds answers, but she doesn't claim any kind of status for them as being true in some objective world sense. This is the answer she found. Um, and this is the experience that she had. All through the trilogy, this Tribute to the Angels, I think, is the book where that has the repeated quote from the book of Revelations, where John says, I, John, saw, I testify. Over and over, I, John, saw, I testify. And what can you say to that? That's she saw and she testified. And you can dismiss it like Randall Jarrell did, Dudley Fitz and those guys, um, as being, well, what Jarrell called her silly, right? Duncan just has a ball taking that one apart. That's what I wanted to say. And at the beginning of this was that in order to understand what Duncan is doing in these chapters, you have to understand the situation of the literary world in the 1970s. And it was a world in which these three figures, who are immense, immense influences in his imagination, had no recognition in the official literary world. They were dismissed for various reasons. So what he's basically doing here is, and as he points out, the women, the women were completely ignored in the official literary histories. Pound got some mention, partly because he edited The Wasteland, you know, and The Wasteland, that was like the fucking untouchable piece of precious cultural, whatever. You couldn't, that was the one, that was the poem. And then there was Stevens, with his lovely iambic pentameter, and his beautiful poems. He makes it, but HD gets X'd, completely X'd. When I met Robin Blazer in 1968, HD had ceased to exist as a literary figure. She'd been excised from the anthologies. Her work were all out of print. She didn't exist. He lent me the 3 Oxford University Press copies of the War Trilogy because that was the only way you could read it. So what Duncan undertakes here is to basically rewrite the history of that moment from a non-patriarchal point of view. Because what we had was the patriarchy, the literary patriarchy. I'm sorry, I'm up north and I have no Wi-Fi at the cabin where I'm staying. It went out, so I'm at a friend's house. But he just got home from he just got home from teaching in Toronto, so There's a little bit of a commotion. Sorry. Hi, Christian. Anyway, back to poetry. The crunch that, for me, running through this over and over and over again is I hear Duncan's deep, deep concern to explain a poetry of process as opposed to a poetry of
Intent.
Product.
yes. Yeah, and that's not aesthetic. That's not an, I mean, it's an aesthetic decision, but it's not primarily, it doesn't come from aesthetics. It comes from understanding the nature of our very existence, our experience of the world.
A-
It's a cosmological stand. Sorry, Julia, go ahead.
and his understanding of the purpose of poetry and hence the role of the poet in time, not just the contemporary moment, but across time.
Yeah. Yeah.
But could you remind me, in terms of all that we've been talking about, what year did he write the essay about the homosexual in America?
Oh, it was really early, wasn't it? Like
For
40,
1948,
oh,
48.
I was going to say 47, 48. Yeah. And he had, at that point, um, who was it? Uh, one of those big guys who edited the Swanee Review, or, they were all, the only literary outlets at that time were like these reviews, right? Which
One of those
were,
new critics, right? The new
Dwight,
yeah,
critics.
and they
Dwight,
were,
Dwight,
John Crow
Dwight
Ransom?
McDonald. I
it
think it was
was, I think it
Dwight.
was Ransom. I think it was,
Yeah,
no, it was Tate.
Ransom
I think it was
or
Tate.
Alan Tate?
It was either Tate or Ransom was the editor. And when Duncan published that article on the homosexual in society, they refused to print his piece. They took it out of the lineup, and refused to print it. So, well, there you have it, right? There's the story right there. I mean, they controlled what poetry was seen. And it wasn't until the late 50s with the Mimeo machine that started to change. And Duncan was part of that. A lot of his early work was, handmade. Some of it was Mimeo. Some of, it was, and down to the last minute. Oh, we had this fight with University of California Press because, you know, they proposed this cover, the cover that you know,
Uh-huh.
and as part of a unit, like they wanted a unified series of books of the collected Duncan so that they all look the same. And we proposed instead this as the book, as the cover. Um, just Duncan, And then on the back, there's this postcard that says, Dear Vic and Mike, thanks for asking me to write a blurb for Robert's book, but I never had much interest in selling things, and being dead hasn't changed that. Besides, magisterial was never my thing. Actually, it wasn't Robert's either, as you can see from my stamp. But the fix has been in for so long now, even his old friends have forgotten what he lived and died for. At least I don't have to put up with that anymore. Being dead does have its advantages. Love, Jack. And you can see, I don't know if you can see the
Is that
photo of
Spicer?
Duncan
Yeah, yeah.
with his Mickey Mouse ears on and his crossed eyes. Anyway, yeah, so we made our own book covers, handed them out. Actually, I have some, I think I still have some left. And if you guys, if anybody wants one, send me your address and I'll send you one after this thing is over. But that was the Duncan never wanted to do the same thing twice. He did not want things to be standardized. Okay, well, you can have one, boy. He didn't want standardized. He wanted whatever's coming out at this moment. Because that's the foundation, the conditions that he was working with. And I mean, you can come at that from however you want to come at it, philosophy or science or whatever, but it's in fact our condition, you know, that whatever this is that we are thrown into here, it seems to unfold without a pre-existing order.
Uh-huh.
Collapse. I love the quotes. I love it when he quotes Schrodinger in this. Um, I mean, Schrodinger is the guy who came up with collapsing wave functions, and the universe literally, everything in the universe literally being a collapsing wave function, you know? It's so I mean, when it comes to writing, I mean, I don't know what you guys think about this, like in terms of your own writing practice. Um,
Uh-huh.
there was a group of poets. Remember, I had you read some of the Georgian anthology at the very beginning of this as a kind of counter, so you could understand what HD was rejecting. Um, and they literally had uh, a programmatic approach to writing poetry. And the first step was to conceive the poem. You had to conceive it in your mind. Okay, once you conceived the poem and what it was going to do and what it was going to say, what its themes were, then you could come up with a form for that, maybe a sonnet or an ode or whatever. And then that's how you would produce a poem. And that's what, Pound, I mean, Duncan comes back to Pound's early proposition about the musical phrase, composing in the manner of the musical phrase,
And not the metronome.
and not the metronome, not the metronome. How do you compose? I count syllables sometimes. I confess.
I've done that.
Yeah.
There's something about, when you have a line that's a certain number of syllables, there is a certain quality that comes through regardless of what you're talking about.
Yeah, there's a measure. You have the sense of a measure. And it doesn't even have to be like I count syllables, but I'm not rigorous, like, oh, there has to be 10 syllables per line. But plus or minus 10 plus or minus 5, you know? I mean, you It's a question of measure and the sense of measure, of a controlled measure.
I love that question of measure, and I sort of want to return this to an earlier uh, thought about pound, because one of the things I think is most seductive about pound is his investigation of beauty.
Yeah.
And I was seduced early on by pound, and um, and yet later on I've sort of come to what a thought about how Pound's understanding of beauty is also invested in politics. And there's not in any way a sort of simple way to reconcile this or not. I mean,
There is no
I
reconciliation.
yeah, I stole a book. I stole a book from a library. I mean, I stole Pound's cantos from a library when I was young, right?
I'm impressed.
Yeah, but to think about
Most
Pound
people were
was
stealing
invested
Fanny Hill or
himself
something.
in politics, and so there's that question. So how do those things relate? I'm not sure. I mean, I have my own sort of answers, but when you think about these questions of like how does poetry seduce and what it means to be invested in those things, I mean, what do you think?
Well, I don't know. I think it's interesting. Like Pound, I mean, Pound at his when he's really on is like really on, and I love to read it. I love to read it out loud. I mean, he has such a powerful sense of rhythm and measure. But it's not a poetry that I find particularly useful in terms of my own writing. Um, Although it probably influences me in ways that I'm not being particularly conscious of. But Williams, on the other hand, I Williams is like speaks directly to us writing today, I think. You know, he I mean Pound speaks to me and because I mean I love it's the beauty. I mean there's beauty there, you know, there's absolute beauty and a recognition of beauty and the creation of beauty. Um,
But he goes into Duncan goes into the whole thing with Pound and kind of that comparison between HD and Pound and what is it on like 305,
When he calls him
306?
healthy minded.
Yeah, where he's like Pound's obsession with the clean line and
yeah,
control
yeah.
was his undoing, and it led him toward down that kind of political path as well. Um, I mean, even though you get, so, you know, I have to say, you know, Canto was it 80, the one where he tries to summon up all of the natural world, rail against the prison cell
Yeah,
that he's in. It's just phenomenal,
yeah,
beautiful
yeah. Well,
thing. But he doesn't do that pagan thing as often as like I see in the trilogy, where HD is like, uh, I mean, the working with the geese migrations and the beauty of the birds and all that kind of stuff is just amazing.
well, that's true, and it's beautiful, and the mythological in HD. I don't know how would you compare it to Pound. I mean, there, you know, it's in Williams too. Like Williams does write, he sneaks some mythology into those poems in Spring and all, but it's very subdued. He doesn't lead with it particularly. Um, but it's there. It's there for all of them because the gods are there. in the world, when you look at it a certain way, they're there. Even for Williams, um, whose whose rhetoric is whose rhetoric is in a disciplined way adheres to the common American speech, which I guess is probably what HD meant by ring-a-ding-ding. But it's not ring-a-ding-ding. It's how people talk. It's like how people talk. And that's what poetry, I mean, arguably the over the last, ever since lyrical ballads, what was that, 1796 or 1798, sometime around there, where Wordsworth and Coleridge declare that they are going to forthwith write poetry made of common speech. And, I mean, we look at it now and it doesn't look quite like common speech to us. It looks like, but it's a far cry from Dryden and Pope, who were doing something very formal. So suddenly there's this loosening. And then for the next 200 years, that loosening proceeds to become looser and continue to define what the language of poetry is. Um, it's the question is, and Williams is the guy where it coalesces, is what's the line between poetry of ordinary speech and ordinary speech? That's why I got that nasty letter from that professor asking me if this Williams, why I hadn't proven that Williams actually wrote a poem. Well, I don't trust professors on poetry, basically, very much. They're after something else than poetry. I mean, that's a gross generalization, but I don't know what happened. Like what happened? And poetry becomes, well, even in the time from when Duncan starts writing the HD book to when he finishes it, there's a kind of radical development in which poetry becomes academic. It's possessed by the university, by the English department. And that's where all the authority around poetry, what is poetry, what's good poetry, what's bad poetry, like who do you read, who don't you read? They call it the canon, but it's really a reading list, right? Somebody's reading list. That's when that all happens. It's like post 1970, really. I mean, it starts with the new critics, but the new critics are just part of a larger culture where poetry is part of the cultural landscape. People read Dorothy Parker. They read Sarah Teasdale. They read Edgar Lee Masters. Like these are books that were in people's bookshelves, like ordinary people's bookshelves. Robin once told me at the turn of the century, from the 19th century to the 20th, almost every household in the United States had three of the same books. And those books were the Bible, Shakespeare, the collected works of Shakespeare, and Emerson's essays. Every house had those three books. And the Shakespeare, people read it, and not only did they read it, they read it in like really tiny little print. Because I have my grandmother's Shakespeare, it was like those books show up in the used bookstores all the time, right? Those old Shakespeare collections. But then along came, this is what Creeley told me once. He said, Eliot and Pound, between the two of them, reduced the readership of poetry by 80%. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, well, it's true in a way. Suddenly you had to work at it a little bit, you know? You had to know stuff or figure out how to, or be motivated to look stuff up. Um, it wasn't just like, the incredible wit of a Dorothy Parker, which everybody got, you know.
Where would you slot like Don Allen's anthology into this genealogy you're unpacking here, Michael?
Where would I slot it in?
Yeah, how would that factor into the history you're sort of plotting right now?
Well, it was the dividing line. It was the event that created a profound division in
Yeah.
the understanding of what constitutes poetry,
Yeah,
not the
the
American poetry, but
anthology wars.
well, it initiated what became known as the anthology wars, yes. Um, because at that time, the only anthologies were um, pretty traditional, you know, poets of England, and I can't remember all the names of but they were like the old Louis Untermeyer anthologies carried over, you know, um, and it was just the same people. It was the same establishment approved poetry. And and what had happened in the meantime is the Mimeo machine. And beginning in like, I don't know when, 55 or 56, when the people started to just print their magazines, Floating Bear, Fuck You, a magazine of the arts. Like you could print your own magazine with the people that you were reading that were sending you poems and that you were sending poems to, and then you could mail it out to 100 people. Actually, you could mail it. You can't do that anymore because it costs too much. Like, no, seriously. Like for
Yeah.
me to for me to mail I used to mail magazines. We had a writing group here, and we did a run of open space magazines, like Post Open Space, and I would mail them to the States, and it would cost me $5 to mail a magazine. Well, it now costs 18, I think, dollars for a mimeoed magazine that you've stapled in the corner that cost you $4 to make. You have to pay $18 to send it to somebody. Well, they figured out how to stop that, didn't they? So much for that. Um, I mean, now there's other modes, right? There's PDF books and PDF and online magazines and whatnot. There's always a way around it, but the New American Poetry was a profound break. It was a it was a shock. It sent a shock through the literary world. I mean, it was shocking. It was beautiful. It was beautiful. Like, reading that work, like reading Creeley and Larry Eigner and Duncan and uh, everybody, Olson, you know, Frank O'Hara. It was like news. It was the news. We were getting the news. We weren't getting some, preformed, thematically consistent, unified statement about something or other that we didn't give a shit about, really, life, death, beauty, whatever. But this was stuff that was like just pouring out of people's hearts and minds. And it was the news in relation to what was actually happening. It was beautiful. And then, and then, the supreme joke is that, many of the people in that anthology who were breaking all the rules, and it became a way to get a university job. Olson at the Berkeley conference in 65, that's what he was going on about. He was offering, I don't know if have people ever read Olson's address to the Berkeley conference? It's quite something. And it gets dismissed. I mean, he was basically, he even pissed off Duncan, like Duncan walked out on him, right? Um, but he was disappointed to see that the opening that the New American Poetry had made was already being closed because it was now a way of getting a job in a university and becoming a professor. Um,
I absolutely want to hear more about that, Mike, and I want to hear more about what you think Olson sort of responded to. But I just wanted to mention that I think the 1950s is an underappreciated moment of transformation, not
uh-huh.
only in poetry, but just in intellectual thought. So we often think of the 50s as a way of, I don't know, sort of going back to an ideal moment in the past, but it was an absolutely transformational moment. And I think
I couldn't agree.
Olson was angry about the way it was not fulfilled. So
Yes.
I guess my question, yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, you go ahead.
So I guess what I think in terms of Olson, I think Olson was angry in that address about the way in which the the capacity of intellectual innovation that took place in the 50s was not being fulfilled in poetry or in other intellectual arenas. And so yeah, I guess that's the point I want to make. So if you can follow up on that.
Well, yeah, I mean that's absolutely it. He for Olson, poetry is thinking. It's thinking. That is its great value, is that you are able to actually think in dimensions that you can't think in any other mode of writing because of the ways in which poetry utilizes other dimensions of language to amplify the meaning that is emerging in the process of writing. And that's like, for Olson, that was everything, It was just keep pushing, like just keep opening, keep thinking, keep moving, keep it up. Like that's the goal and the responsibility of the poet to do that. And then there's a Duncan talks about the moment where the showing forth of meaning, which is a thing seen, the showing forth of meaning, which is a thing seen, where image and logos are revealed in the gift of the idea. Now, so what Olson saw was the poetry being turned into a performance. And we've all been subjected to that horror, right? The three reader thing, the blah, 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 and then the open reading at the end, because that's the only way you can get anybody in to listen to these other people is if you promise them a chance to read their poetry too. Um, and it's all about performance. And he says this as early, he's
The Private Soul at Any Public Wall,
yeah,
1950.
yeah, yeah. He's where did he do that? I can't remember the name now. It's a well-known. Olson did a residence at this college, and
Beloit,
yeah, that's it.
Beloit, Wisconsin.
And he talks in the lectures that he gave there about how disappointed he is to see poetry becoming returned to a performance art. That the reading, and he says, I'm going to give up readings. I'm thinking about giving up readings because that's all they are now. It's like it's just a performance. And what he did at Berkeley was the antithesis of the poetry reading. He pulled out his bottle of Cutty Sark. He started drinking. He started going on and on. He'd start to read a poem, then he'd stop and he'd start talking, and then he'd address the audience and tell them that they were part of the nation of poetry and that they had responsibilities. And Allen Ginsberg was the minister of this, and Robert Creeley was the minister of that, and they had to. And he was like basically chastising people. And that did not go over well. That did not go over well at all. People still like kvetch about Olson's performance in Berkeley. They don't get it. If you hear somebody talking about, oh, he was a big shipwreck, he's a big drunk shipwreck, well, then what you know is that they don't get it. And Duncan was very much part of that. I mean, that's the heart of this writing that we read for tonight is he keeps coming back and back and back to that. That it's like poetry has to be an opening. It has to be, we have to find a way to keep it opening. And then he traces it back to Pound and HD and Williams and how they contributed to that understanding of poetry that he inherited. That's I think the main thing for him out of this constellation of stars that determined his fate.
Michael, there was a thread in the chat that started with Cass and went on to Mateo that I thought was kind of interesting. I don't know if you had a chance to see that.
I didn't see it.
And Mateo, I don't know if you want to rekindle that, but I thought it was a really interesting point that you made. So I can call it up. I did respond to that notion of the 50s being a special time because Sam Ohana is doing his graduate work on that period and why it was so extraordinary for poetry. And he's a student at CUNY. And so this interview I put in the chat, but that wasn't what I wanted you to address. It was, no, it wasn't that. Give me a moment to get to the right tab. And when Zoom is on it, it's difficult. I guess I skipped ahead. Anyway, there was a mention of yeah, see, it's not it. If I go back to the course outline and then to the comment section, that's the easiest way for me to find it. And then down to Mateo's comment responding to Cass. So it's right here, Matthew Morse. And he was quoting Cass. And Matthew, I don't know if you want to read that, but I think it would be instructive here.
Oh, we're back to
Uh,
this. Okay.
I'll give it a try. I mean, it's a, I don't want to come off as arrogant and all-knowing either, but
No, no, no. I thought you brought up
That's
some good
okay.
points.
okay. So Cass, I thought Cass brought up a very good point because I struggle with not feeling my knowledge of mythic or religious systems is complete enough to participate in the constellation of meanings that such allusions evoke. On the other hand, intellectual study of these systems does not necessarily bring one closer to such identification because it becomes overly rational. What are other ways of thinking about or approaching this mythological aspect of poetry in Duncan's tradition? Because Duncan grew up with the myths in his from the time he was 3 or 4, so he was in his bones. But anyway, I'm writing to Cass, trying to clarify my own mind, I think. In my limited experience, a conceptual slash intellectual understanding of various religious systems or philosophical is a great place to start. Then you choose the system that speaks to you and you go deep. In fact, you probably already have a preferred religious or philosophical system that you're currently working with, in which case you might want to get under or beneath a strictly left brain, logical, intellectual approach and enter the intuitive world of the unconscious, personal and collective, the paranormal, the mantric, the visionary, the dream time. If anything, we have more tools today than there were in Duncan's time. The world is smaller, the visionary drugs are more varied and of higher quality. And there are teachers from ancient wisdom traditions that are open to initiating people into spiritual practices or occult practices or esoteric practices, as long as you're in good mental health and have a sincere interest. And then there's the path of poetry itself as a mystery cult, which revolves around hero worship, as Pound mentions in The Spirit of Romance, and Duncan refers to a few times in the HD book. Basically, choose your heroes and merge your mind as one with them. A Guru Yoga. Through reading their works and the relevant biographies, it helps to memorize the works of theirs that you love the most, and listen to their readings a lot too. Get it in your bones. Take what you know about spiritual practices of the body, the speech, and the mind, and apply them to poetry, and vice versa. Apply and vice versa. Apply what you know about poetry to your spiritual practice. Um, Duncan was born in 1919, and so he had kind of one foot in the 19th century through his parents, right? Duncan was born in 1919 and found a way to bring life and meaning to gods such as Eros, Orpheus, Hermes, etc. Whereas I was born in 1962, a mid-century person like most of us here, and feel a much stronger connection to abstract visionary states, experiences, feeling tones, and colors, apropos painting in 1950s culture there, than I do to particular deities from ancient Greece or even, say, Tibetan Buddhism, which I've practiced for many years. I've never seen Eros herself, Orpheus, or Hermes in person or even in a dream, nor do I care to, want to. But like all of us, I do know what Eros, and I'm talking on a romantic and cosmological spiritual sense, I do know what Eros feels and sounds like, and I have a personal relationship with the principle at work. And by way of apology, sorry to both state the obvious and preach to the converted. Thank you.
No apology necessary. Just saying, it was
Okay.
a joy to read it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Cass.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. You know, it doesn't hurt to like pick up Edith Hamilton or Robert Graves and just read the
Mhm.
myths. Like that, my way into myth when I was a teenager was Edith Hamilton's book on Greek mythology, and it was an eye opener. I mean, there's no way. I mean, Duncan's understanding is so sophisticated by this time in his life. Like it's not just that he was born into a family where that was there, but he pursued a knowledge. He pursued a knowledge, and as you can tell from reading the book, he was pretty thorough about it. Um, but
Hey.
what if you want to know who Hermes is or who Aphrodite is or whatever, read Edith Hamilton or Robert Graves' book on the gods is like extremely useful. There's a ton of them,
Chat GPT, go one god at a time as they come up,
Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do that.
Yeah, Ovid is a great source too.
Ovid, yeah, read Ovid, read the Metamorphosis. That's such a fabulous book. And it's so central to everything from the Renaissance on, I mean, the whole half of the Renaissance literature is based on having read Ovid. I mean, exaggerating, but I do that
Well,
all
that's
the time.
all they had for till pretty late in
Yeah, well,
Europe.
there was other stuff, but Ovid was a brilliant writer and a fabulous poet and a shit kicker until he got busted, sent to the Black Sea.
Right, but then it even still produced stuff in exile. So we
I
now
know.
have in translation.
Yeah. A lot of it was whining, you know. I don't blame him. I'd be whining too if I got sent from Rome to the Black Sea and there's all these stinking barbarians like outside the gates trying to kill me. Boy, the emperor really knew how to get him, man. Hey, we're kind of in the same boat now, aren't we? I mean, not us, but the
Yeah,
people down south. The emperor's like,
they're sent to Eswatini.
yeah, right. Yeah. But it's like a mythology. My teacher, Jack Clark, always told me mythology is a mode of thinking. It's just another mode of thinking, like math is a mode of thinking, Mythology is a mode of thinking about the world as as peopled forces or as forces that we give shape to, but that are universal.
Doesn't Duncan actually say that literally somewhere in here that the gods are emotional states?
Yes, yeah, he does. And I mean, again, I'll mention Hillman because I just recently read, I think one of his collected books is called Mythic Figures. And in it, he goes through each of that would be a useful one for you to read, Cass, if you want to like do some background. It's Hillman's book called Mythic Figures, because he goes through all of the main figures of Greek mythology, Greek and Roman mythology, and uh, he writes about them in a way that makes clear the force that they have in ordinary daily life. I mean, forget, you know, Mars as a god, but think about the way in which aggression and war figure in our lives still to this day in the same way that it did in that day, when it was given this image. But we think in images, right? I mean, we think in images, especially poetry, but if you pay attention to what's going on in the process of your mind, which is a fucking dark place, what is it that's going on down there? Who is it that's speaking right now, right? Um, where did that feeling come from? Duncan's sense of the gods and of these figures, these powerful figures that flow through our lives in one way or another and influence us. Still, I mean, you fall in love, man, Aphrodite's behind that. Um, and some of the
You
darker
said
parts
something
of it.
like an hour ago about comparing mythology between Pound and HD, and I wanted to come back to that for a second, if it's okay. Um,
Sure.
it seems like with Pound that the the tradition is the tradition, whereas with HD, at least after her experience with Freud, mythology is always syncretic and autobiographical.
Well, and part of Psyche's realm. Um, yeah, and it's never with Pound. Pound never. Well, Duncan says not until he's penned up at Pisa,
Yeah,
Pisa.
he doesn't have his books on him anymore.
That was his book. But until then, there's no psychology in Pound. I mean, even though he wrote psychology in the Troubadours, back in the 1915 or whenever, there's no address to psychology in the sense that Freud represents and that HD entered into wholeheartedly. Um,
Pound was a man of action. He was about getting things done and moving the art forward. He was different that way, I think.
yes, and I don't think he liked the idea that there was this thing called the unconscious that was actually making him do shit and he wasn't in control, you know?
I think that's right. If I can jump in here, I think that's precisely right in terms of psychology and also in terms of Pound's understanding of the way that economic relations uh, sort of were apparent or acted out. Pound thought that there was a way in which one could intervene precisely economically that would allow one to solve the sort of problems of what's happening. I think his resistance to psychology and his acceptance of a certain set of political ideas at the time were precisely conjoined.
I couldn't agree
And
more.
and his concept of beauty, probably that in his herky-jerky way of moving, like when you read stories about his fencing style or the way he moved on a tennis court, he was very choppy, apparently. Yeah.
Pound played tennis.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's in the biographies, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Mostly fencing. He was into fencing back in.
Yeah, I know about the
Yeah.
fencing. Yeah, that's like right up his alley. You'd have a sword fight. He could challenge somebody to a duel.
In more ways than one.
In more ways than one, yeah. But he blew it open. He really blew the whole thing open. And you have to give him that. There's no way that you can get through 20th century US poetry and not go through Pound. Whatever else you think of him. I think he would have been fun to have a beer with, you know. It would have been interesting. I don't know if I would have had a second beer with him, but the first one would have been interesting. Williams is the guy, you would have gone back week after week and.
I was gonna quick because I feel like so much, not ink spilled, but voice has been given, for the sake of my question, which I really appreciate. And uh, I think to Mateo, what you said, and I appreciated it because I think like some of it's like an imposter syndrome thing where it's like, uh, I don't know, it's just like when you're in the presence of masters, like it's just like how how can I ever amount to this? But I think like also just like with where I'm at right now, I mean like I am very rooted in a Christian tradition, particularly, but like a larger Abrahamic and interest in like the Hermetic and Gnostic and all these sort of offshoots. But and something that was sort of talked about in the last class too is this when we talk about Gnosticism and like particularly getting that kernel of gnosis and this way of knowing that like always is generative and opening up new things, which is what we've kind of said about Duncan's approach to poetry here too today. But yeah, I've been very so in pursuit of that, I've been reading through my HarperCollins Bible with all of the footnotes because I just like I want to try to understand as many different ways to get at what this text is throughout the ages, and then I'm at the same time I'm like doing Blake with Bloom's commentary, and it's just like it's so sometimes the commentary is just so overwhelming that I'm just like it almost snuffs or sort of threatens to snuff what originally sort of is the spark. And so I think that's kind of what I've been struggling with. But I mean, just like hearing what everybody had to say and sort of reading Duncan at this particular time and working through that question, I think has really given me permission to like hold that like research, but to also just recenter where that original like seduction like was, which is a term somebody used. And so thank you all for like everything you said, because I think it's been really a good companion to the processing that I've been doing.
Lowell, you had a comment in the chat. I'd love it if you'd bring it up.
So, my comment was this: where is space for poets who are personally engaged in this process that we're talking about to talk to each other? Because I think this happens in community and not as rugged individualists. I think spiritual discovery happens in community, and I want to know what your ideas about where that community is.
Who are you asking?
You
I'm
primarily,
asking you. I'm asking
Me?
you. Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
but if
Are we
other,
coming to your house? Is this what we do on Friday night at your house? I'm serious about this.
but I
You
would
know,
also
we're
welcome,
we're, we're
I'd also welcome others to chime in after Michael has his say.
Well, I don't know what to say. I mean, you're asking me about spiritual community. Um,
yes. Well, it's poetic community too.
yeah. Well, I guess I find my spiritual community mostly with other artists and poets. Um, I don't I don't have a practice per se. I have a I hold to an Emersonian principle of aversion. Um, and I think Duncan does too. I think Duncan mentions that at some point. I don't know if it's in the HD book or something else that I read. Oh, I know. It was in a letter to HD. Um, Early on, they communicate. She writes to him about she was invited to go to Yeats's house, and there was some kind of spiritual seance or something that was going to happen, and she chose not to go. And Duncan identifies with that choice, and talks about his own aversion to joining the theosophical organizations that his parents belonged to, and he says that he sees in this, in her and him both, in this aversion, a commitment to life, um, which I take to be a proposal that well, it's Emerson's proposal, that life is in the aversion to abandoning yourself to someone else's way of seeing the world. And that aversion is something that Olson calls it resistance. He writes that marvelous little essay called on resistance in the 50s, where it's addressed to his friend Jean Riboud, who was a Holocaust survivor. And he talks about in a world where human value has been reduced to, um, some teeth and bones left after the conflagration, that all that we have left is resistance, and not, I mean, not, he's talking about mental resistance. He's talking about a state of mind, a stance that he then writes into projective verse, a stance that resists being subsumed by someone else's system. Well, that's Blake
So
too.
is is that this is so is that the danger that if you enter into a mutual community that you will somehow
I don't think so, Lowell. I mean, I don't.
uh,
I I think that there are communities of people who are aversive.
be,
You know, I mean, and it's
subsumed
but to give up. I have been in one of those. I abandoned myself to um, a an organization which promised perfection when I was younger. I mean, and perfection, that's the problem. The
Mm,
minute somebody starts talking to you about perfecting this or that, like just run, man.
mhm,
Um,
mhm,
because sooner or later they're going to put you through the grinder so that you fit they can pack you into the perfect mold too, you know?
mhm,
Um,
mhm.
I'm trying to remember where HD has a thing in the trilogy, kind of pushing back at the perfection of maybe the astrological uh, planetary movements and things like that.
yeah, yeah. Yes, she knows.
Yeah, because she's like, no moment is ever the same, but they have these, resonances.
Yeah, they do. And the minute you stop paying attention, you're doomed, you know?
Mhm,
The minute you
mhm,
give up your attention to someone else's system
mhm.
or someone else's whatever, then you're doomed.
So, so
I
my
mean,
my
sorry.
response to that, my response to that is, and then I'll quit. My response to that is, I have touched this kind of community at Matt's house when I stayed overnight at your house, Matt, and we sat up late, and you and Zan and I would just talk, and we talked and we shared a bunch of stuff about about a wide range of things that was opening, where we were opening, and we talked about where we came from, which was different places, but the sense of opening, and it's in that kind of community and meeting, which maybe it only occurs between two people or three people or some, I don't know where it occurs. That's why I'm asking the question. But
Yeah.
anyway, I have experienced that in the past. You know what I mean, Matt? You know what I'm
Mhm.
talking about?
Yeah, and
Now I'm going to quit.
yeah, well, and Duncan on page 310 uh, says that the germ of the sense of art and life as the creation uh, of a community of feeling. Um, and I think that that's something that he's getting at is like, even though like, yet, yes, he he does say he has said a number of places and lectures and whatnot that he would never give a take a creed or anything other than to poetry. But the idea of the openness is to be able to create a community where the practice is kind of varied, but we have like, we're creating this kind of depth and connection and feeling without maybe the idea of perfecting each other.
Feelings are never programmatic, are they?
Right.
You cannot programatize feeling. A community of feeling is, it's like souls recognizing each other. But they're not telling each other what they should believe or what the correct line is or what they have to do in order to perfect this or perfect that, right? They communicate with each other. Souls communicate with each other.
That's a
And
really good point.
Duncan,
Mike,
oh,
sorry if I can jump in really quickly. I I had a point which I hope I can articulate, but I may not. But you mentioned Emerson, and I think it's really important to even in these sort of discussions about thinking back through poetry in the 20th century to think back to Emerson and what Emerson said about the idea that being a poet was being a vessel. And I think we might want to distinguish between a community where we're actually talking about the same things as a vessel and a community where the people are talking about different things. I think that's a really fundamental distinction that Emerson was trying to get through, and in terms
yeah,
of self-reliance and in terms of his ideas about what thought might be, and
yeah, and what self might be.
what
I mean,
self might be. Exactly.
yeah.
Yes. Yes,
Like
exactly.
self-reliance is not about individuality. It's not about an individual.
That's
Right?
exactly.
Self is for Emerson, he says, we lie in the lap of an immense intelligence. You know,
Mm.
that's the self right there that we all share. We all share that self. Um,
And he also prioritizes intuition, right? All other teachings are tuitions.
yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. It's such a great essay, you know. I mean, you can just, it is, and you can't, all of these guys, I mean, Olson had an argument with Emerson, but you know what? It was the kind of argument that arises when you actually think like that guy and you're trying to find some way to like prove that you don't. But you do. I mean, he liked Melville because Melville was a sailor, you know, he went on ships and shit like that. And that was great. And Melville was fabulous. But, you know, and Melville also had a bitch with Olson. Like I mean, with Emerson.
Oh.
He he would he didn't know how to really, I mean, he liked a lot of Emerson, but he felt that Emerson was like this Platonist and that he'd fallen into Plato's honeyhead and but he didn't. I mean, Emerson was, I mean, I don't know if you read Stanley Cavell, but or not, like he's the best reader of Emerson that I know of. And he over and over again will lead you to the point in Emerson where Emerson is actually a, he's avoiding he's avoiding the the very thing that Olson accuses him of, which is to say that he says, you know, we would gladly anchor, but it's quicksand, and the anchor keeps pulling up and moving, you know. So how are you gonna anchor yourself in that? You can't. It's like exactly what Duncan is saying about the conditions change and the ground changes, right? So you have to be on your toes, like paying attention to where you are, not where you were, or not where you think you are, but where are you? Yeah, yeah, Emerson is the great mind that has inhabited all of us, I think, all of us. Yeah, you got to read Cavell on Emerson. There's this book called Emerson's Transcendental Etudes that collects most of Cavell's stuff on Emerson. The first essay that I read was at the back of the Census of Walden, which was his initial interest was in Thoreau, Cavell's interest. And I mean, his basic line is that Thoreau and Emerson invent a new mode of philosophy that is specifically American, that it avoids the kind of tedious technical language of a Kant or a Hegel, uh, but it addresses the same issues in an ordinary language that takes on yeah.
But isn't it basically coming out of Thomas Taylor's translations of Plato? I mean, or Neoplatonism, it really was deeply influenced by,
Who, Emerson?
yeah, yeah. I mean, well, the Asian thing too,
Well,
and Indian philosophy.
absolutely. But he was also, he was, he was committed to the idea that there is no foundation, there's no longer a foundation. It's why he gave up the pulpit
Yeah,
and took up the lectern. Because he recognized that there was no longer a
mhm.
possibility of religion to speak the truth.
Yeah, that was the Indian influence. I always thought that the Hindu Buddhist thing
Well, that was part of it,
strained.
but the other
Yeah,
part of it was that he would do the ritual of the Last Supper on Sunday, and then everybody would do that, and then during the week they just go out and start screwing each other again, and you know, fucking up and having affair, and like doing the opposite of what they had ritually committed themselves to on Sunday. And he's thinking, because he says it's gone, like it's gone. There's no longer a foundation there that holds people. So what is there? What do we do now? Well, we have to think. We have to think. And the world, and he says at the end of Experience, that great essay, Experience, he says, I know that the world that I think is not the world that I meet in town and in market, I think he says. Um, but somehow, like you cannot theorize the world. You can't think it. You have to live in it, um, and engage it as it's unfolding. So I'm sure there's lots of different sources feeding into that insight, but the fundamental insight is postmodern, honestly. That's the beginning of it. And like Melville, I mean Moby Dick is the beginning of postmodernism in America. Not postmodern. It's the recognition of the postmodern shift that we are now being subjected to in spades, you know? I mean, we're seeing the this is the for like when Olson first used the word postmodern, he was talking about time. He wasn't talking about style. He wasn't talking about this is how you do this or this is how you do that. Or he was talking about the fact that we exist at a moment in time when the epic that we have been part of for the last 500 years is coming apart. It's not, I don't know why, can't tell you why it's happening, but it's happening. And it's disintegrating. All of the epistemic field that held us together in a kind of common knowledge of the world has come apart. And Trump is like just the guy who came in at the right moment to like really put the pièce de résistance on the whole thing and knock the struts out, you know? Like, what's truth? There's no truth anymore. There's no democracy anymore. There's no, all of those ideas that were the foundation of the last 500 years of modernity are toast. I don't know what's coming, you know? This is not it. Like, whatever this will blow over. These guys are not, they don't have enough serious chops to actually make a
No, but
profound change.
Dionysus might be doing his way with them at the moment.
Yeah, well, yeah,
Make
And you can tell what that looks like when you look at the eyes of Kash Patel.
yeah.
We are over the 2 hour mark,
Oh,
so I just wanted to note that. I also wanted to note Matthew's comment, I'm always open to talking poetics, and Aaron agrees, and Jay agrees, and Cass says it sounds like might be a good idea to send an email out to the
oh
group
yeah.
and get something going. So I'll leave that in
yeah. If anybody
Cass's
wants to
capable
just,
hands. And I'll stop. Is there anything you want to say, or should I just stop the video now?
bye, Julia.
No, I
I
think
gotta
Julie
take
wants to
off
talk.
too.
Oh, Julie wants to talk, I think.
So I'll stop the recording with such gratitude for you all.